To order for Monday, April 18th, and our first committee is claims.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to open the claims meeting. And I'd like to, we have two claims on the docket, and one of them is going to include our outside counsel, so I'd like to call for a motion to go into executive session.
So
Is there a second?
You second.
I'm second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we're going to go into executive session.
No comment.
Like I can believe something that is so true.
All right, next on the agenda, we have a presentation by all of us. It's going to be on the results of the Black Freedom Project Community Safety Survey. So I'd like to invite Jamaica Miles and Sean Young to come up. And all council members should actually, oops, microphones.
Yes.
Should be red, right?
Yep, my turn.
All council members should actually have a copy of the survey. So,
Yes, and actually we have two other documents to share with you all that we're gonna talk about. If you wanna just take one of each and then pass it around. Oh, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to share this information with you. It is the community safety survey that we conducted. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to share it with all of you as we have shared it with others. As I think most people in this room know, I'm Jamaica Miles and this is Sean Young. We were both born and raised here in the city of Schenectady, and we founded our organization, all of us in the city of Schenectady. What you might not know is actually our organizational mission, which is to support and strengthen marginalized communities in the fight for Black liberation and an end to all forms of racism, oppression, and exploitation, and doing so through uniting people across socially created divisions. We understand the importance of collective work. Therefore, we have been intentional to develop relationships with other groups and organizations locally and across the state. As such, all of us is a member of the Black Freedom Project. The Black Freedom Project is a coalition of Black organizers and Black-focused organizations across New York State. Also known as BFP, the Black Freedom Project, together with the Public Science Project research team, developed this community survey to understand what we as Black New Yorkers believe keeps us safe and what investments, institutions, programs, and policies would positively impact our communities. All of us knows how important a survey dedicated to illuminating the perspectives of Black and African American participants is. Black viewpoints have historically been excluded or underrepresented in most research studies. Research intentionally focused on the Black community makes a unique and important contribution to discussions and planning regarding safety and the allocation of resources in the city of Schenectady. This survey also is about community engagement. Next slide.
Yeah, so as you see on the screen, we let people know where the survey would be on specific dates within the community, as well as spend time walking in our community. Our ground game focused primarily on the Hamilton Hill and Mount Pleasant neighborhoods. We met people where they were at, whether walking down the street, at home, or at local stores and shops throughout the community. We shared digital flyers on our social media platform and paper ones at community events and local organizations and institutions. Listed on this slide, as you see up there, are locations and partners we worked with to reach Black people within our community. Our focus was places of known community gatherings, barbershops, libraries, food pantries, community centers, etc. Meeting people where they were at was not just about physical location, but also about giving the access and support needed for participating in the survey. Some folks were comfortable taking the survey on tablets or on laptops, others preferred a hard copy. The survey was administered by ourselves and some trained volunteers.
Next slide, please. The survey results are based on 305 Black residents in the city of Schenectady identified by zip code. While there were many different demographics collected within the survey, this is the breakdown by age. The largest number of respondents, as you can see on the screen, were between the ages of 36 and 45, but there was representation between ages of 16 and up. The one other respondent is an individual that, even though they originally identified as being at least 16 years old, indicated a number that was outside the parameters. One of the handouts you all received was the list of the other types of demographics that were collected within the survey. And it shows not just the questions asked, but the inclusiveness of the options for answers as well as the opportunity for individuals to choose not to answer. Next slide, please. The very first question, which we see here, was to confirm that the individual was at least 16 years old and that they identified as Black. Being Black does not mean that you do not identify with any other race or ethnicity, and individuals included, if they did indeed identify with other races or ethnicities. We'll quickly go through the next 4 slides that are the questions the participants were asked, and there were questions regarding investments, current institutions and policies, current institutions and practices and policies. Next slide. They were first asked about the allocation of money. Next slide. What safety means and looks like for people in the Black community. Next slide. Prioritization of policies. They were given a list of policies and they were able to choose each policy. Was it a high priority, a medium priority, a low priority, a policy they didn't want at all or something they were not sure of, and also the opportunity to describe their answers. What was it they did or didn't like about that policy? Next slide. As you all saw this previously, this is the list of those policies that were included in the survey. Next slide.
All right, so the results of those questions are next. So included are both quantitative and qualitative data. Now again, this was to understand what safe, healthy, and thriving communities mean to the Black community. 3 buckets, if you will, are investment, current institutions and practices, and policies. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have a city budget. So when asked to imagine themselves being in charge of the city budget and responsible for reducing a safe and thriving community, on average, Schenectady residents that participate in the survey prioritize long-term housing for all and expanding access to healthy food and hunger prevention services. Next slide, please. The next 3, which are all very close in allocation, are quality, physical, and mental health care for all, high-quality public schools and living wage jobs for people of all education levels, the constant presence of police, and police equipment receive the lowest amount of funding. Next slide, please. Jails, prisons, and detention centers. Now, when asked about jails, prisons, and detention centers, the greatest response was to move away from imprisonment and toward diversion programs such as mentoring programs, restorative justice programs, and job programs. My slide behind?
Yeah, no, it should have been the next slide after this. This is where we skipped.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah, we thought we were gonna have the clicker, so.
yeah, it's fine, it's okay. So I'm gonna tell you to skip 3 slides ahead. There it is.
That's where we're at?
Yep.
Okay. So on slides 15 through 17, 75% of respondents would prefer a greater emphasis on community-based violence prevention programs that move away from police presence or responses as it relates to preventing and responding to violence.
3 more slides.
The next question asked about emergency response in the community. 66% of respondents would prefer a greater emphasis on first responders to emergencies that are unarmed and without threat of arrest.
Next slide. Look, one more. There we go. See, no clicker. Very hard to read on the screen, but also in your packets. This is the policy breakdown, where they were able to decide high priority, medium priority, low priority, et cetera, et cetera. As was mentioned, they were able to choose a different one for each policy. For each policy, they indicated if it were, which priority applied to them. When prioritizing policies, more jobs for all levels of education with good benefits that pay enough to support a family was a high priority for 85% of participants, as was more food and nutritional assistance programs to address hunger. A high priority for 84% of participants were affordable housing, not shelters, for families and individuals who become homeless, and more money for public schools so that they have the space, staff, and resources they need to support all their students. What we saw in the policies were similar to the allocation of resources. Next slide. We've included a sample, a small sample of the comments and written responses for 3 of the policies that were listed. Next slide.
Yeah, here we have a slide that's about affordable housing, not shelters for families and individuals who become homeless. Now, these are what folks had wrote on, where we indicate some ideas about what they meant when they were saying, as you see on the screen. Folks like there are a lot of homeless people in the city. Having a safe environment to call home is so important for our community. Every person is entitled to a clean, safe living situation. The rent is too damn high. The rent has skyrocketed and is outrageous. Are part of the comments from the community and what they were thinking.
Next slide. It's important to note that none of the comments were altered in any way. They are reported as they were written. They weren't changed for grammar or spelling or context. However it was written, that's what they wrote. That's how we reported it. And so for this particular policy, it was to remove all forms of policing from public schools and replace with school counselors, psychologists, behavioral specialists, and trauma therapists. Again, this is a sampling of what was seen within the survey. Not enough attention is given to the mental impact police presence has in schools. In my experience, police presence hasn't affected school a lot. Youth need to have someone listen to them and not judge that they will automatically be violent. There's any number of examples that are in this slide that you all had previously and that we collected as part of this survey. Next slide.
So this is a larger police presence in the community on public transportation around the city and the schools and et cetera. And we see other comments from our community. No police presence, they do too much harm. It's good and bad, which is that's actually a really important point right there. So out of all the folks that we gave the survey to, there were folks that landed on different sides of talking about whether or not they wanted to police in the community or not. But what we did notice, a really good takeaway was that no matter who was on that survey, on average, everyone prioritized all these other things as being important to safety in their community. So that's really important. So you see someone here saying good and bad, and well coordinated, not more. So not that it's about not having police at all, but that they need to be well coordinated in their addressing issues in the community.
Next slide. So what are the next steps? We spent weeks talking to community members, being really intentional about where we went. From November through January, the information that we gathered then went to the research team in New York City. They compiled the data and sent it back to us. And when we started the survey, we made a commitment to share the results back out with the community as well as other stakeholders. As an example, we presented the results to the police chief and representatives from each of his departments. As part of the continuing research that we are doing, we are facilitating data-driven focus groups. We actually held our first one on April 7th back at Sikkim, and we'll continue to go back to the locations where we started. We'll go back to City Mission, we'll go back to the Seat Center, we'll go back to the libraries in both Hamilton Hill and Mount Pleasant because those were the two major focuses of our area.
That's it. So we'll take any questions, but we look forward to the opportunity to be able to continue to share with you the thoughts, ideas, and concerns from community members, supporting you in your mission to move forward policies and resources that represent the interests of the residents you serve. It's really important. That last piece that I wrote there is about the community engagement, and how often we're there, who we're talking to, and the conversation we're able to bring back to you all in order to address the needs of the community. It's not been seen, at least in my time here, that there's been surveys like this and the type of engagement necessary to really hear from the community in the ways that actually have an impact.
Any questions?
Ms. Williams.
So I wanted to first thank you, both of you, for the efforts and investments you've made into this survey. As a person that took this and identified as a cisgender male who is a Black Schenectadian, that was a mouthful, in no way did I interpret your presentation as an all-encompassing gauge of all things affecting every single Black person within this community. How I internalized your words was more or less as a guide to help us define some areas that we could potentially address and have more of a pulse towards directing our efforts. So with that, there are a number of steps that are being taken at this moment throughout the city. What is the frequency of this survey to potentially grade the efforts that are undertaken?
I mean, that's part of our future planning, right? The work that I particularly have been doing for more than 10 years is to be a constant presence in this city that I was born and raised in, to talk to community members and find out what's going on. Education and safety are two of our main priorities as an organization. And so it is a bit of cyclical work, right? To have these conversations, find out what the community is saying and what's in their best interest based on their needs and lived experiences, and as well as the data that we've seen from across the nation. Bring it back and then go have continuing conversations, those focus groups. So if there are particular things that we see arise, we're then able to continue to work with the research team and create other surveys and have conversations. They've been a wonderful resource, and they continue to support the work.
And I'll add to one of the things that's an issue with addressing things in the community is the consistency in which we're actually speaking with our community members and engaging them enough in what the issues are happening there. We don't do it enough. We look for more opportunities to do that. We're actually, one of the priorities that we have is coming back with the information that we gathered in our community. The community focus groups, we already had one. At Sikkim, we're going to do another one at Legislative Barn, at the libraries, just so that, so one of the things that does is allow us, one, to give to the community the words that are from that community. We're going to put flyers up for people that took the survey to come back out and hear kind of these are the results of that. And it's important to do that, right? So that we're engaged and that we act as a community, that we're not in this by ourselves, right? One of the things I tell a lot of people is that when you step outside of your house, you walk onto that sidewalk, you go to a store, this belongs to you. This is your city. It's a collective ownership, but it belongs to you all the same. Have some say-so in how this thing goes for you and how it's run.
Something we didn't mention that I think is important, and we should have, is that when we go back out to share this information, everyone is welcome to come. So when we were back at Sikkim, it wasn't just individuals that took the survey. There were other individuals in the room. There were also individuals that took the survey and could speak from their personal experience taking the survey and then hearing those results. But there were other community partners as well. Bob Carroll from the Schenectady Foundation was there. Tom from Sikkim was there. So those partners being able to be part of that conversation as we share the information back out, and then hearing their responses, because we have that as well. We have those responses for what they said at that meeting, which I believe is the other one pager that you all have.
I have a question. So you identified some things, and what immediately came to my mind was about jobs, and that was an important thing. So since that was identified as such a high priority, what steps are you actually taking to address that with other groups, or however you're facilitating that?
I mean, when it comes to policies, right, there are some very broad things listed. Mm-hmm. And so part of those focus groups is then identifying down where do these community members see a potential for that to be addressed. Because one of the wonderful things about going out and talking to the community is that they are filled with ideas. Mm-hmm. They have the answers to the problems, it's just that no one's ever asked them. Mm-hmm. So as part of these focus groups, it's, okay, so if we say jobs, what does that mean? But is that focus group pulling in on that particular issue? We were at Sikkim, so a lot of conversation around food as well as housing. Some of the other conversations that have been had about jobs is how do we create support for people to move into careers as a pathway. Your favorite example is whenever we have construction here in the city. Mm-hmm. How are we ensuring that our own residents are actually getting those jobs and that money stays here in the community? How can we foster that? What does that look like?
In addition to that, we've had a conversation with folks from CWI, which is Cannabis Workforce Initiative, and other, the MAP program in Albany is something I spoke with Ron Gardner here about. And the MAP program is a multi-architectural pre-apprenticeship program, and it just meets people in the community where they're at as far as their understanding of the construction trades. It's a stipend 6-month program of learning the basis of construction, and another 4-month disciplinary program on whatever, whether it's roofing or electrical work or whatever. That stipend, and then there's a partnership with the union that gets them jobs working on initiatives in the community to help revitalize it. So those are the conversations we're having that we'd love to see actually happen here in Schenectady. So we're doing our work there to bring those type of ideas here and just have that conversation and bring it to the community.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming in, for sharing this information. And if the public wanted to see this, is this a public document that people can access to?
So we haven't yet posted it online. We're trying to figure out what's the best way, the most accessible way to do that. Dropping it in the Google Drive isn't always necessarily best fit. Right now, we were able to share it out electronically. I had to fix a couple typos, so it's coming. And if anyone is interested and want a copy, they can email us at untitledandfree@gmail.com.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
I would like to call the Public Safety Committee to order. We have one item on the agenda today, that is School Community Engagement Officer, and that'll be presented by either Chief Clifford or AC Clifford.
Right.
And/or.
Microphone, no microphone?
No, but stand as close to this one as you can.
Okay, well, good evening and thank you for having me. I put together a PowerPoint presentation. I have Chief Whipple with me and I also have Sergeant Linier with me also. If any members of the council has questions. But we're here to talk about Community Engagement Officer, which is truly a partnership between the school district and the police department. Now, it's important to start off with New York State Governor's Executive Order 203, which was brought to us 2 years ago by Governor Cuomo, and the recommendations derived from the collaboration that was held in response to that executive order, which was then ratified by the City Council on March 22nd of 2021, signed by Mayor McCarthy on March 31st, and submitted to the state, included two recommendations that really embodied community engagement, and those were the creation of a community engagement officer unit of officers that receive specialized training in the areas of harm reduction, in addition to community health initiative training. Building a model within community policing where these officers will work to reduce the negative consequences of using drugs while understanding that an individual may not immediately stop. That model was really specifically towards creating a unit that would go out and focus on harm reduction within our community. But then number 18 of the recommendations was to expand our community policing efforts, staff the department to allow for community policing unit that will build neighborhood collaborations to build trust, solve problems, and reduce crime. So that was put into the recommendations. So why do we need police in schools? That's why we're here today talking. Many members of our community have asked that question. I want to start off by saying that on any given day, the population of Schenectady High School is approximately 2,800 students and staff. In Oneida Middle School, that number is approximately 780. Mount Pleasant, 870. Steinmetz, 350. Central Park Middle School, 800. And that's just those schools right there. So concentrated populations of this size anywhere within the city would always be met with a threat assessment from the police department. And we're talking about internal and external sources of that kind of population all coming together. Now, the City of Schenectady School District has had a history of police-related issues that have been a concern to the police department leadership over the last few years. And I brought those issues to former Superintendent Larry Spring and most recently Superintendent Annabelle Soler. The concerns we had were that the staff had been discouraged from contacting the police. This is feedback we got directly from the staff, teachers, administrators, support workers. There were incidents that were not reported to the police, assaults that occurred in the school, past assault disclosures, threats, menacing, students coming into the school with weapons not being reported, investigations that were of criminal nature investigations that involved that of a crime the investigations were started and completed prior to reporting it to the police. Fights in or near the schools, lunchtime. Sergeant Linear can expand more on that, but lunchtime, many fights in the schools. And then in the neighboring community, outside of the school, and not specifically the high school, but other schools like Oneida and Mount Pleasant Middle School. Persons with mental health disorder in the school district, not always having mobile crisis unit within the school available to be utilized. Trespassing of suspended students, expelled students, parents of students coming into the school, trespassers with no affiliation like students from other schools, and then students leaving school grounds and engaging in activity outside of the school district that would prompt people to call the police. And it's important to note that many of these concerns, almost all of them, were noted and brought to us before our global pandemic of 2020. And when the pandemic hit and school shut down, it kind of hit pause for us. So I had a report generated and everything that was going to go to Superintendent Spring, and then the pandemic hit. But when the same pattern emerged in the first 2 months of this school year, 2021, I called for a meeting with Superintendent Solaire, and he brought his leadership staff in so we could discuss this issue. And that is when a partnership was formed the partnership was formed to solve what was seen as a safety crisis that was developing within the school district. So the concept that we came up with, that we agreed that police were needed to help solve the safety crisis that was developing, but we would need to meet and look at what that would look like, what our role would be in the schools. So the leadership of the school district and the leadership of the police department, we collaborated on many meetings to discuss the needs of the school district community. We conceptualized the community engagement model, the one that I just explained to you that was derived out of the Executive Order 203, and what was needed within the school district itself. That police officers would have to be specially trained, and that we would want to make sure that we not only provided them the training that teachers and administrators in the school district were getting, but that we were also going to reach out to industry leaders in the school resource officer training field and get them the training also. So in true partnership form, meeting with Mayor McCarthy and Superintendent Solaire, it was agreed upon that the school district, that officers in the school benefited the city and school district equally, so the cost of the program should be shared equally. One of my requirements for this to happen was accountability. We recognize that nobody wants to be policed. You know, in our perfect world, police aren't even needed, and that the presence of the police officers may make some students uncomfortable. And to get past that, we were going to build trust. We were going to be really focused on building trust. Officers need to be held accountable to meet the needs of the student population and deliver that consistent level of service to the population over time. To accomplish this, consistent supervision would be necessary to accelerate that trust building. That's why I asked for a sergeant to be, I required that a sergeant be placed in the school district pilot program to start off. So the plan. This is a map of the city of Schenectady with all the schools. And the plan that we came up with was 2 officers in the high school. You just gotta hit the button. 2 officers in the high school. And then the other school the schools that we were really focused on were the 4 middle schools. Mount Pleasant Middle School. Mount Pleasant Valley Middle School is not named correctly, that's an elementary school. So we were focused on those middle schools, and then we didn't want to forget the elementary schools. There's a whole bunch of them. So all the schools into account, and again, the plan really came down to that we would want a sergeant to oversee this whole program. We would put 2 officers in the high school because the population is 2,800. We would then place 1 officer that would be assigned to Oneida Middle School and Central Park Middle School. 1 officer for both schools, go back and forth and be there to meet the needs of the community as needed. 1 officer for Mount Pleasant Middle School and Steinmetz Career Leadership Academy and Washington Irving that will basically meet the needs of those 3 there. And the sergeant would be a floater to float between them as needed. And then we would have 1 officer that would go to float between all of the elementary schools. And that's how we got to the number of 6. The cost is $100,000 plus benefits. That was the number that was used to calculate the shared expense. And the easy math is sharing $100,000, that's $50,000 for the school, $50,000 for the city. But as the years go on and and costs increase, approximate raises, we built in a 2% increase. So year 2 would be $102,000, 50% each, $51,000. Year 3, 2% on top of that. So year 3 would be $52,020 each. Now this agreement maintains that all overtime associated with working in the schools, such as varsity games, dances, things like that, it's paid 100% by the district, which is our current arrangement. So those numbers were simply just for staffing during school days. So that's the cost. So what's the benefit? The benefit that I see is the building of bonds between students and officers. And what they lead to? They lead to an improved sense of safety inside the school and outside the school. We want students and staff and faculty to feel safe in school. It'll benefit by having improved interaction with police officers for students. They will become familiar with police officers, they'll feel comfortable going up to them, whether it's inside the school or outside the school. They'll have a better understanding of them, they'll have a mutual respect. I personally have experienced cases where back when we had school resource officers, they got to know the student body so well, it paid dividends years into the future. I'd be out on calls where situations were tense, and those officers that were school resource officers were able to go in there and calm things down simply because they knew the person that was possibly being problematic, or they knew one of the complainants and they were able to ease tension. So that familiarity to me is one of the biggest benefits, and it's an investment that goes into the future. You know, students that are 10 years old now will know police officers the rest of their lives. Students who trust officers will bring problems to them that they have for justice, guidance, or counseling. That's another important piece, is that we want access to the police department to be there for the students if they need it. They don't feel comfortable getting it at home or being able to call and get the police officers. And then the last benefit really is for the school, to reduce need for police being called to the schools. They get priority service in the schools. That's what the benefit for the school is. For the city, we're going to have problems dealt with before they become bigger. Nip it in the bud, be able to address things before they turn into a police call, and basically pay it forward within the school system itself, as far as taking care of themselves, policing themselves. We recognized the need in September and October. That's when our discussion phase was. We implemented this program in November. You'll see the calls for service were 112, 117 those 2 months, respectfully. The pilot program starts, they drop down to 68, they go up to 89, 57, 61, 80. So there is a reduction in the calls for service that originated from the school district with the implementation of the pilot program, which was just simply 2 officers. So our request before you now would be, as a part of our police reform and reinvention collaborative, the Schenectady Police Department and the City School District wish to enter into an agreement for the police department to provide up to 6 officers, 5 officers and 1 sergeant as community engagement officers assigned to designated city schools. This agreement would take the effect July 1st and run through June 30th, 2023. It is for a total of 6 officers, but our phase 1 would be to add 3 officers immediately, and then at the beginning of 2023, September of 23, to add those additional 3 officers. We had to do this to get them properly trained. I can't just take 6 officers out of my staffing that I currently have. And we would request that for the 2022 budget that I add those 3 positions. That is a budget neutral request, because the amount of money that we would receive from the school district should cover the cost of the officers going to the police academy to replace the officers that are in the schools. And then we would be making an additional request for the 3 in our 2023 budget request. That is your comment. Thank you, and we will open it up to any questions at this time.
Great, thank you, Chief, and thank you, AC Whipple. I think it's appropriate to hear from our resource officer that's here, unless there are any objections. Would you mind coming up to the front and talking about a typical day? And just briefly summarizing, I imagine you came from that.
So the days vary based on the needs of the district. Early on, me and Officer Rivera usually signing the kids that are in school late, and then it's responding on a need basis. So, we have to keep in mind there's 17 different schools within the district. So, there could be an issue, child made a disclosure at Mount Pleasant Middle School or Howe Elementary. They range between, we've had threats written on the wall, specifics as it relates to, whether they say they're going to cause harm at a certain school at a certain time. So, it varies. I've talked to staff members about the eviction process. And again, it just depends on the day.
Good, thank you. So are there any questions from my fellow council members? Mr. Mudavan?
Chief, you mentioned, that's one of the questions I was going to ask, but you mentioned money, the reimbursement we're going to receive from the school will turn back into hiring additional staffing. So that would be incremental as you are putting staff into the school district. You're going to use that reimbursement to hire additional staff, or are you going to do it at one time next year? The additional 5 officers.
We would put the more senior officers in the school, and we would hire officers, train them. Those officers that would then go on the street and staff our streets are typically the lower paid ones until they get to seniority and they rise up steps. So the model that we have built out, which is that they're sharing the cost of the officer we're giving them, it covers a large amount of the cost of the officer that is replacing them with also. That's why it's considered budget neutral this year. And when you build it out, maybe 10 years from now, it's a different conversation. But for right now, it's there's not a heavy lift from the department, from finance end.
So the cost that you quoted here, this is for senior officer, pretty much,
Yes.
for next year?
Yes.
And you also mentioned that you're going to be hiring senior officer into the school district. One of my concerns is that when you be hiring senior officer, in the contract it says recommendation of the PBA, the mayor, and you. I would also like to see the officer who has experience dealing with youth several years over the course of being in the police department, be considered for placement here.
Yeah, the way our system works is that we have a seniority system within our police department for the patrol level. So when a job opens up, we bid it for senior, and the senior bidder gets the opportunity to interview. So through that process, we find out who the most senior person is, and then we take a look at them and interview them. And if we don't feel that they're the right fit, then we move on to the next one. We had that discussion, and then we have the additional layer of sending them before the school board administration, the school administration for them to give approval also.
Ms. Porter?
So I'd like to follow up on that. So I know that you said, because I read here that you do this all through collective bargaining, which is clearly seniority, et cetera. But are there instances or some things that you do that are merit-based positions? And because I share Mr. Mudabaran's concern with that we want officers who, it takes a certain amount of temperament. It takes a certain temperament to work with young people on a day-to-day basis. So is there a possibility that there could be a merit-based system so that officers are chosen as opposed to just doing it by seniority? Because frankly, looking at it from 8 to 4 is a pretty nice shift, and in the schools. So, and maybe I'm making it sound easier than it really is, but it's a shift that people may bid on, where it's as opposed to being out in the street. So, I go back to, is merit-based an opportunity for this as opposed to just based on seniority?
We have some jobs in our department that are merit-based. Those were derived through the negotiation process with the PBA. I think that before we, I'll defer to the mayor on this, before we go too deep into that conversation, it might be something more for executive session to discuss than do it publicly.
Okay.
I would agree with the chief, even though the PBA has been a partner in this in terms of discussion, trying to get the right people there. And you saw from the chart, you have to understand, we're putting police in the schools every day now. Those are calls for service. They aren't just stopping there randomly. It's somebody's dialing 911, reaching out to the police department, we're sending a car there. So this allows officers to be assigned to the school district. So they're building a better rapport, a more functional knowledge of who the leadership is within each individual building, and then also rapport with the students. And I think it's a better way to respond to those calls. And you saw, it's still preliminary data, but we had 2 fairly active months when the officers are assigned there. You see that start to drop in the earlier months on that chart. You have to remember COVID is there, so that the baseline is skewed. But I think just going forward, it's better to have these officers there than having somebody who would be randomly dispatched there based on the configuration that we use in the street, where you can't always guarantee the officer with the training unique to the school is going to go there. And it's an evolutionary model. It's one that I think is going to pay off good dividends. It's part of the reform package. And the dialogue has been one that I'll call just dynamic. So we're looking at how do you do it better? How do you engage the students? How do we better serve the public as a whole? And if we can drop those calls down to 0, it would be the ideal end game. But yes, there are some components where you get into an executive session if the council would like to do that, or just follow-up discussions depending on what the specific questions are.
I do have, I have a further question. So currently you have 2 officers in the schools?
Yes.
Just 2? And were they chosen through the collective bargaining system?
They were the senior bidders.
So other people bid, but they were the highest. Okay. And also, when we did the reform and reinvention, which this came out of that, were community engagement officers, was the intent for them to be in school? Was that the intent when that piece of the the plan was passed?
No. No, it was part of the process of sitting down with the superintendent and his leadership staff, and we started talking about our Reinformed and Reinvention Collaborative and the idea behind the community engagement officer, and he really liked that idea. That's why we chose the name rather than school resource officer, is that, we knew that we wanted to engage more with the community. He knew that he wanted us there for a variety of different reasons. And we just felt that it wasn't an exact fit, but there was a fit there. And just to go back to the officers, and them getting the job through the seniority process, I like to say that it's my job, it's Chief Whipple's job to make sure that every officer working for us is going to be, regardless of how they get the job, appropriate to go into the police department, go into the schools. Like, I don't want to just find that diamond in the rough police officer to go into schools. I want every single one of my officers that works the street to be acceptable to go into the schools. And that's what we work for every day.
Thank you. In terms of the training that the officers, I believe that there's like a more comprehensive training that the safety team undergoes. Can you talk a little bit about that process in terms of some of the topics and presenters that meet with the team and do the training? The training that's above and beyond, the police training.
I'm not very familiar with it. Sergeant Lee might be able to help out a little bit with it. I know that there's an organization called NASRO, National Association of Resource Officers. It's a basic school resource officer training. We do plan on sending our officers there to that training. And I know that there's other training that has been put on by the school district and by the school safety director, Jeff Russo, that they've already gone to, and they're invited to.
It was Therapeutic crisis intervention that was, given by put on their staff at the district. They take, we completed that with their school psychologist, or one of their school counselors and a master social worker.
And I have another question. Thank you. I have a concern that the officers have to float among the schools as opposed to officers that might be assigned to specific schools. And I guess, again, have you found that challenging, that you have to be in many different places on any given day?
Can you join us up here?
Yes, I'm
Because
sorry.
it looks like there's going to be a few questions for you.
Because then you'll be on the camera that the public sees.
Yeah, and that's what, the pilot program,
Right.
With 2 officers and 17 different schools, made for some busy days, addressing the needs at the different campuses. But, that's what we've been tasked with. And I think that's, collectively the school district, saw the need for additional officers to handle that workload. So, that's how we're handling it now. And, there's some emergencies if I was tied up, I had to supplement us with patrol.
So I had a question. Pretty simply, just how is success going to be measured? I know that we are entering this at a point in time, as you highlighted in the presentation, where there's a lot of incidents that are happening in the school. Can you just identify some of the metrics that you're going to look at to be able to gauge whether this program is improving or not making any substantial benefits to those issues?
Sure. So we're going to measure this program like we do, how we measure ourselves on a daily basis. We're going to look at calls for service that are generated. We're going to look at the number of major incidents that are happening where we are needed there. And we're going to just speak with the administration about conducting surveys, getting feedback at the end of the school year, hearing from the school community their thoughts, they're getting feedback. But quite generally, The absence of major issues in the school is really going to speak volumes, and that's what we're really aiming for. We're in the business to put ourselves out of business. We get to a point where there's no issues, and the empowerment is there for the school to police themselves through school security monitors. I'd be happy just to leave just as fast as we're coming in there. So we're there for a reason, and who knows if it'll be a short-term thing or a long-term thing, but we want to make sure that it's a safe learning environment for everybody, and that's primarily our focus.
And then a follow-up question to that is, based on your answer, if the priority is safety, and then the additional areas that were highlighted in the legislative reform to include like educators, and then also, let me just to include educators, and then also making sure that the environment is safe and improving relationships. I think if the onus is placed too heavily on the safety element, my question then is, how is a community engagement officer different than a police officer that's in a school?
How is it different than a police officer?
If more of the onus is placed on safety, absent making sure that they're taking the appropriate steps to build those relationships and apply that community health initiative training that they were trained to use, if we're not grading that also, I think that can be very much a missed opportunity.
Well, if I think I understand your question right, I'll answer it this way, that, on a daily basis when police officers are out in the community working, we are there empowering the community to police themselves. And we are simply the agents of the society to have the ability to enforce laws if needed. And I would see that we are working the same way in the school district. We are simply there. We have the ability to act if needed, but we don't want to act. We want to empower the school safety officers, the staff. We want to have our presence there be of such that everybody just does what they're supposed to do. And there's no threat from the outside of people coming in there thinking that they can come in and assault a student because their children had a disagreement the day before. We don't want one student to feel that they can attack another student and get away with it. We don't want students feeling that they can bring weapons into the schools and get away with it. So we just simply want our presence that's there to be the deterrent. And at the same time, while we're there, we're taking the opportunity to be educators, to be counselors, to let the students have access to the police to meet their needs if they have any.
Thank you. And would you be opposed to, if the council should decide, I know you mentioned doing annual feedback surveys with the staff and the students. I think it's our responsibility as a council to make sure that we're acting representative of the community's interests to potentially provide us just a report in an X amount of months, should we approve that, to just gauge how well this program is functioning.
I would not be opposed to that. I plan on speaking to the superintendent about that anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Forte?
So, I didn't, when you said that you were going to, for your evaluation process, it was going to be the school staff, you didn't mention students, so I'd like to know, would students be included in that, and were students included in this whole discussion, in terms of, I know that, well, anyway, were students, I'll let you answer, were students included in this discussion in terms of the community engagement officers in school? Was there any kind of focus group among the students?
Not by the police department, but I believe there was done by the school superintendent.
Okay.
And that was just a misspeak. I would definitely want to get their input at the end of the school year, like what are your thoughts behind it, get ideas from them on the program.
Okay. And I did have a question about the training, the NASRO, but that is specifically training just for police officers, right? It's not, well, what is it? Is it just specific, like if you're going to police in the streets, or does it include police officers being in schools?
I believe
Yeah,
they're
that's
focused
specifically for school resource officers.
That's that specific training? All right, is there a breakdown somewhere of what actually, I know that you spoke it of what happens in that training, and you don't have to have it right here, right now, but if we could have that.
Yeah. that data is certainly available.
I believe it's available. They have a website.
Yes. And it's a model that the police officer as an informal counselor, like you said, a role model. And that's what's important for me is, I didn't know any police officers growing up. And I think it's important that, our youth see, officers that look like them, that, come from neighborhoods similar to theirs, et cetera. So, I think it's an opportunity. I know you talk about success, but in terms of recruiting, years ago, I was tasked with recruiting, and I think it's, being a role model for our youth to be the difference that they want to see.
Oh, sorry, it's cold.
If I can just add something, thank you. I was in some of the conversations related to this agreement, and the question did come up related to what Ms. Porterfield brought up, related to NASRO. The school district indicated that's the gold standard for training. It's obviously the National Association. There's a state version which actually doesn't meet, according to the school district, the same criteria that the national training provides. And as was indicated, there is information related to it, and I have it available to me too, so I can certainly pass that along.
Mr. Mudavran?
Yeah, just to follow up on Ms. Porterfield question, community engagement officer. When we passed the police reform and reinvention, this was primarily targeted towards the community. And now we're hiring these officers to complement what is going on with the school district. Are you going to be hiring additional officers to go out into the community and be part of this also? And do you have a target date for that?
Yeah, the program that we have in the recommendations, we have every intention of building that out. We just haven't gotten, we're not there yet. We are putting the training, we're implementing the training that we discussed for those officers already. That's being built out. But that's still in the works, and I will be updating our collaborative on where we're at with that next week, or coming soon. And but we originally applied for a COPS grant to be able to build that program out. We were not successful. We're going to try again next year. So that's the hope as far as that program goes, how to meet those needs.
Would it be safe to say that the reimbursement we're going to receive from the school will turn that into hiring additional staff that can able to be community engagement officer that can be found within the community as a reimbursement rather than putting that money into something else?
Talk about whether there's...
The reimbursement from the school for the 6 officer.
Well, they should just cover the 6 that we're going to be, that we be bringing on for them.
Yeah, but regardless, we're going to hire these officers. So those are reimbursement that we need to just return that back into something else. And hire additional officer, 6 more officer with that reimbursement that we're getting from the school.
The reimbursement we get from the school.
If the council chooses to put more money in the budget, but that's, right now the department is lower staffing level than what I would prefer, what the chief would prefer. So it's over the next 12, 24 months, try and work that back up to what we consider an adequate staffing level. And part of that charge is to have those community engagement officers. Not only as specific assignments, but every officer that's out on patrol, as the chief talks about being able to handle whatever the call comes up. It's the nature of the department where some officers end up with a little area of specialty one way or the other by the luck of the draw of some of the cases that they end up being assigned on or calls they go to, or their natural proclivity or educational background where they have a little bit different skill set that is more applicable to some of these, but it's to make sure that everybody has the level that's able to serve the needs of the people when they get the calls, and then hopefully as the calls go down, that you can do more of the community engagement so that you're talking to people, you're walking the beat, you're having more of the deterrent effect and just a smoother engagement. with the public as a whole.
Yeah, my concern is that we don't want to just leave behind, I'm not saying you can leave it, you're doing it, it's a good program that we're spreading it in school and community, but I'll make sure that we are addressing the police reform that was intended for, to have these officers into the community also at the same time. They will complement both the school and the...
That's the goal.
Yeah.
As you know, it's always trying to get the budget
I have to mention it.
Ms. Patrick?
Well, I just want to clarify, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I thought in our 2022 budget, which we had the report already with the recommendations, I thought we actually already had included money in this budget for community engagement officers, and that this is a new program, so this is new money on top of what we already put into the budget for adding community engagement officers, but I could be wrong. But that was my memory of this.
It's also the nature of hiring the police where until they've passed the civil service test, be able to be hired, we have to send them to training.
Right.
So basically an officer that first year can't be used. And so it's been filling those positions that are in the budget and to maintain the level of staffing. So this is a position I think works for everybody's benefit, even though it might not be considered to be perfect.
Any questions? Ms. Bertram?
Yeah, so I would like, and it seems like we can't discuss it openly, but I really would like to discuss the merit-based as opposed to just by seniority. I think that's an important, as we know, people have different ideas about what should and shouldn't happen in schools, but I think it's extremely important that we're placing officers in schools who, we want to look at just everything and make sure that it makes sense. If this is what's going to happen, that there should be a vetting process and not just the standard seniority process. So I would like to have more discussion about that.
Mr. Toro?
I thought I was under the impression that you would interview them, and then the school board as well would interview the candidates for the positions in the school, correct?
That's correct. We do interview them. However, that interview isn't necessarily to select them as much as to interview them to potentially exclude them. The job is bid, it's theirs, and then we interview them for the right fit. If we feel they're not the right fit, then we speak to them and say, you're not the right fit. And we
And then so when you feel it's the right fit, would go on to be interviewed by the school board to make sure they're a right fit as well.
Correct. Yeah, my intention will be to present an officer to the school board that I'm confident they're going to be fine with.
Right.
But that process is different than the merit-based. It's still by seniority. So that's why I really wanted to discuss that.
Okay, so I'm in agreement with just pausing this conversation until we're able to pick this back up in executive session. So pending any further questions.
No, you have to move into executive session. Don't we have to move this into executive session?
Well, now we just need to recess.
Recess.
Yeah, if you're going to continue the conversation.
If we're going to, yeah.
Recess.
Right. So
I'll move that motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, unless there are any other topics before the committee, can I get a motion to adjourn?
No, you can't recess.
No.
We just
we already-
recessed.
That's it.
It's all right.
We'll pick it up in
It's all right.
executive session.
I got it.
I would like to call to order finance, and we have two items here, and just as a simple reminder, calling for a public hearing, the CDBG-CB funding to prevent, prepare for, and respond for coronavirus. This is on April 25th. And the second item is also a reminder for public hearing proposed HUD annual action plan. Public hearing, April 25th. If there's nothing else before finance, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
I'd like to call to order City Development and Planning. We have 13 items on the agenda. I don't see Mr. Wallen. Is he here?
Should be
On his way down, okay. He should be coming through the door any minute. Our first item is to authorize the issuance of a revocable permit number 668, to Ganesh Hospitality for a sign that will overhang the city's right-of-way at 759 State Street.
I think that's detailed in the
It is.
packet, what they call it, the standard application,
Yep.
so I'd ask the council's favorable consideration until Mr. Long gets here. I want to give the impression we get by without him, but we could probably handle this one.
Here's the sign.
Has everyone had an opportunity to actually look at the information provided in their packet?
Yes.
If so, are there any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move it.
Second, sorry.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, item number 2, to authorize the mayor or his designee to enter into an agreement with the New York State Department of State for the city's downtown revitalization initiative program, contract number C1001884. Are you taking this one too, Mayor?
This is part of the
DRI?
DRI award, and it's government, so there's a little bit of paperwork with it. And looking for you to move forward on this. This is for the master contract, I think.
It's right here.
One of two master contracts.
Yes, I just wanted to,
Yes.
if any of the council has any questions on it, so Chris, I was trying to.
He was filling for you.
Terrific.
Number 2.
The delay's a little longer than I thought.
All those questions that I couldn't answer, now,
I didn't even see him.
Okay, we're on number 2.
Number 2.
Yes,
So we're talking about DRI contract number 84.
that is correct.
All right. So what are the questions with contract number 84? Are there any at this moment?
Anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, item number 3, authorize the mayor or his designee to enter an agreement with the New York State Department of State for the city's downtown revitalization initiative program, contract number 1001885.
So this is, I can't remember which one is which off the top of my head.
Try
I
to
think
get
it's
you.
85 Broadway in Clinton. Does it state that?
That must be this one, I think.
It's in my description, I just don't have it.
85, yeah, because 84 is North J Street and South Avenue.
So 85 is Broadway. It's a lighting project that we're going to be working on for installing decorative lights on Broadway and Clinton where we don't have them. It's kind of match what we're doing downtown. It's the reason that you don't see us paving Broadway right now with National Grid cuts, because we're going to be coming in there as DRI and doing the same thing. So we were going to do it all at once. Get the trenching done, get in there, and put the lights in. So it's a good project. This is step 1 of many steps. So, you know, this is going to be a long process getting everything done, but once we get these contracts passed, signed, authorized out to them, we'll start working on our request for proposals to actually get designed, and then that will have to go to the state. So
Do you know the cost of the project overall?
for the lighting, the budget is roughly around $800,000.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, the other project, the budget for those is total project is $2 million, but we'll go over that, but we're probably gonna need to supplement some of that, but that's when we get down the road with design and, because that has the J Street connector in it.
Right.
That has, what else is there? 3 projects, J Street, and then there is City Hall, and I don't know the third one off the top of my head, but there's 3 projects lumped into the number 884.
Okay.
But this is just for getting the contract moving.
Question
Mr.
for
Mudavera?
McCarthy. Could this fall under the smart city since it's dealing with lights? Or is it because of decorative?
These on Broadway were Cobra heads that we did replace with the LEDs, but it's designed to, that project was only the Cobra heads. These are to standardize the lights, so they're the decorative ones that you see in front of City Hall and around the rest of downtown. So just to make it more visually attractive as we upgrade the streets and the overall ambiance in downtown.
Wayfinding, that was the other one.
Wayfinding, okay.
Wayfinding is always a piece that they put in there for going through a wayfinding program.
Are there any other questions?
I'll move this.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And item number 4, awards bid and contract for the city's Schenectady greenhouse composting toilet.
So, the city owns the greenhouse at Central Park. The Friends of the Greenhouse operate it and maintain it for the most part. They really do a great job. They have an existing bathroom facility in both the greenhouse utility building and in the teaching classroom. Neither building is ADA accessible, so when they have public events, they don't have an accessible bathroom. We did investigate the feasibility of making the building and the bathroom ADA accessible. The costs of it were high. They were actually high because you had to build a ramp and open the doors up, and then after they did some investigating into it, then it got into, that's kind of their, not only their teaching space, but their office space. So then it was, do we really want the public to have access into our office space because they don't have enough staff to keep eyes on everybody? And so then they started doing a little brainstorming, and they found this composting toilet idea, which is in use at the Pine Bush. It is a kit system. The contractor will order the kit from Clivis Multrum. It's a sole source. The kit will come on a truck. The contractor puts it together, digs a hole, and it is a self-sustaining composting toilet. No water and no electricity. It actually is going to have a solar panel and an LED light and a fan. So the solar panel will power it to a battery. It will have a tank underneath it for waste, and it'll compost, and then every couple of years, if we need to, we have the equipment to empty that. The greenhouse thinks it fits more in line with their goals, and it could be a teaching item where they're saying is, here we have this, the whole thing is compostable, right? It's about renewable, trying to keep things sustainable, so they think this will be good. And it's a building, it's a fully ADA building, so.
Glad to know that part.
Yeah. So it was something that, we have capital set aside to do this, and it's actually probably a little cheaper than actually modifying everything to go this route and from their goals. So I think it'll be a good project. This is the same contractor, by the way, that we recently awarded the construction of the Muni maintenance building, and that is going on right now. So he's been good. He's working on the Muni maintenance building. The goal is when he's done with that in a month, that he moves over and does this.
So this cost of $52,000 is the entire cost?
Yes.
That's great.
Sounds quite interesting, by the way.
Oh, when it's all done,
Yep.
come on down.
I'll come and look.
It'll be interesting.
All right.
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And we're able to do number 1.
We did it, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Appreciate it.
All good.
So,
The next item on our agenda is the hosting the quarterly meetings outside of City Hall follow-up discussion. Mr. Williams.
So thank you, Ms. Porterfield. I apologize I wasn't able to brief this last meeting, but I wanted to re-engage this discussion and see how everyone kind of felt. I know that there was an article that came in the Gazette regarding this topic. I know when I initially briefed it, I mentioned a quarterly, but it's kind of developed into wanting it to be based around a specific topic. After doing research into the city code, the reason why I included chapter 28 was there's already a stipulation that allows us to conduct special meetings that are only based around very defined topics. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Colden. But with respect to us having conversations throughout the community, similar to this police or the school CEO's conversation, we could have had this discussion at the high school, where there have been a number of discussions already, since it's already a centralized location for this topic. But just wanting to gauge where everyone was, and then potentially highlight some equipment needs, just so if interested, I can begin just looking at what available facilities are in the area to see what our options are to potentially host a topic discussion this year. Want to be realistic, don't want to open the door for too much expectation. So I do think this is something that is easily achievable if we can just fine tune what we each expect from these meetings and provide enough notice to the public.
Oh, go right ahead, Ms. Catherine.
I was trying to figure out who to look to for that. I actually feel, I just want to back up to the day that we had the girls here from the high school to meet with Ms. Porterfield and Ms. DeToro and myself. We got really positive feedback from that, and they met with staff as well around the City Hall. And a comment that the teacher, the coordinator of the program made afterwards was that some of the girls didn't even know that City Hall existed in their community. They had no idea what this was. I thought about the suggestion that you had made in terms of moving the meetings around. And I really think that it's important for folks to come here and feel like they're in the seat of democracy in our city. At the same time, I think that all of us have been going around to a lot of various neighborhood meetings, a lot of different topical meetings. There's one coming up soon that is, the one community, the one Schenectady initiative that the Schenectady Foundation is doing. So I think that there's a lot of meetings that we go to where we can solicit community input and hear community needs on a really regular basis. SICM does different kinds of meetings. So now on to your suggestion that you just made, doing maybe one meeting a year on a topic. I think if that was outside of our regular council committee and council meeting, if we kept our regular council committee and council meetings here, but did add in every so often a topical meeting like you're suggesting, I think that's an interesting proposition to consider. But I would want to keep our council and committee meetings here on a regular basis.
Go ahead.
I was like, oh, I'm confused. So again, it's just being a conduit. So I know absolutely we all attend a number of neighborhood association meetings throughout the city. However, that doesn't specifically address every resident in the community. So there's still a portion of our city where residents are being missed. So I think there's still benefits to us hosting city council discussions within the public forum. The reason why I included the caveat of just having our expectation for this year be one, I don't think there's any reason to be hard pressed to having quarterly meetings right as we're coming out, potentially re-entering a pandemic. And I think placing that expectation with a council that's still formulating together, when a number of members are still new, I think is very grandiose. So for me right now, I think if the intent is to potentially get to having meetings frequently throughout the year in the community, I think starting with calendar year 22, just having the expectation being with one, coming back to the drawing board, seeing how that went, and then potentially reevaluating the benefits. So it's just one to not kind of hard press tie us to, we're gonna do 4 this year, guys.
Mr. Mudaveran.
Yeah. It is something that we have heard over last year about, campaigning, talking to voters, people who are engaged, that we need to engage our community more on what we're doing at City Hall. Exactly what the young lady has been asking about where is City Hall, they don't know City Hall. So we want to take, and it's a good idea you're bringing this up here, so that we take our meetings to the community. When you say one meeting, are you referring to a committee meeting or a city council meeting? Or should we do both in the same cycle?
So we can currently do a special meeting, and at that point, it would be outlining what is needed to have what is needed to have a meeting in the public. So the expectations with making sure that we had internet connectivity, or making sure that we had an appropriate table size, that type of stuff, to make sure it wasn't too displaced when we go to a different venue. But absolutely, I would love to potentially get to having more.
And this is something I support. So what I need for us to work out the logistics? How are we going to be able to get live feed from there, internet access and accommodation if we were to do this outside of City Hall? What are the things that we need to put in place? So can we work on that to see how we are and then what the council, from the council in terms of us doing that outside of City Hall?
Ms. Williams.
Before having those discussions, I didn't want to prematurely start asking as if the council had already decided. I'm just one representative, so I feel very strongly about doing this, but I want to make sure before I start asking Schenectady High School, hey, what are the expectations for us to be able to request the use of your auditorium? I think it's important for me to make sure that we are all functioning with the same understanding and that I'm not acting inappropriately.
And you mentioned Schenectady High School, I'm just going to mention the Boys and Girls Club, just for mentioning it,
So I like the idea of having a special meeting that's, and keeping our council meetings and our committee meetings here right now since we're taking baby steps. So having a special meeting and having it on a specific topic. And actually, I received some emails actually from a former council member who Mr. O'Brien, who thought that, who suggested that back in January actually, that if we're going to do this, maybe we should look at a special meeting on a particular topic. So I'm very supportive of that. If we can, in the future, do our committee meetings or our council meetings outside, I think that's going to take a lot of organizing and arranging. But I'm certainly open to doing at least one, and actually, if it works out well, I'm open to doing more. As Ms. Patrick has said, that we do have, we brought the young ladies here, and they've never seen City Hall before. So I think that both things can happen, that we're out in the public, and we're also, when we're there, inviting people to actually come to City Hall meetings, because currently when people come, it's just because they have an issue. I'd love people to come just to, to engage and to, just to be there to kind of see how we do our process. So I think that going out to them would probably get more people to begin to come. When we want to get on this council, we certainly show up to the public on a regular basis for weeks on end. So I think that, once we're all elected, we should, coming back to the community and having a forum there is actually kind of a nice idea, and says to the community, we don't only come for this time. So I think it might be a good idea. Mr. Palomini.
We don't need to have a special meeting to do this. First of all, we just can have a town hall and have people come and discuss what it is that interests them. Furthermore, if we have a special meeting, we are bound, I'm assuming, by the guidelines of a council meeting where each individual only has a certain amount of time to speak. So why not just have informal town halls where we all show up, let people come and say what they need to say. If you want to form it around a particular topic, that's fine. But to have a special meeting, quote unquote, I don't see that as necessary. We can do this already. And the other aspect is, if we do these special meetings, what will be the cost? There's got to be a cost associated with that. And that, I think, is needed to have before we even go down that road. But the town halls, we can do.
So what Mr. Williams has said is that he wanted to make sure there was a consensus that we would do this before he looked into what the cost is going to be, what equipment is needed, because I think we do have to make sure that it's even something we want to do, otherwise it's just, yes, Mr. Toro?
Mr. Williams, exactly what neighborhoods aren't being represented by the local groups? You say they don't have access to going to the neighborhood association meetings. Are there specific areas that can't get to a neighborhood meeting?
Go ahead,
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
So I wasn't saying that individuals aren't able to become members of specific neighborhoods. I'm saying the neighborhood associations aren't all encompassing of every member in the community. So there are certain members who just don't attend organizations, and I think it's important for us to make certain steps to make sure that they are able to be viewers or to have better access. So this is, again, just increasing access for people to see us and then engage with us so that we can then bring them in to City Hall, because I've heard that frequently where people don't even know where City Hall even exists.
And your goal is to increase people in attendance, first of all, at a special meeting, and then secondly, to get them to come here.
Yes, Ms. Williams.
So my intent, very candidly, is it pains me to hear our public forums have 0 comments, and that represents a legislative item. I think it is imperative that we have continuous input and feedback from the members of our city, and if people aren't using the current processes that are in place, us taking steps to see what more we can do to meet them where they are.
Sure.
Mayor.
In my years of experience, you will notice, you'll look back and appreciate where things have run fairly smoothly and people are all in agreement when you get the meeting where everybody comes out and all of a sudden things have changed so much. So it runs in cycles that it may be self-correcting that you're looking to get out and meet everybody, then one day everybody's just going to show up here. So.
I'll be sick that day, so.
He'll set up the meeting and then not show.
Patrick?
I think that, I think a good example are the neighborhood meetings that we did hold, that the mayor held, that we all attended for the ARPA process. I mean, I think that's pretty much the town hall model that Mr. Palomeni's mentioning. And I'll just throw out there also that don't forget about the libraries as well, because they have a lot of the technology. And pretty much we can, as long as we get on the schedule, use those, you know, at no cost. So it would just be the technology piece, which would add whatever we pay them to.
Did you have your hand up, or you were just waving around?
And it's nothing new. I mean, we've done this in the past. Unfortunately, not very well attended, but we have had these type of events. So to have a town hall and get people engaged with a particular topic or just what's on their mind is nothing new for us, and it's something that we can do without having a special meeting.
I don't recall us as a whole entire council ever doing that.
We certainly took the budget on the road.
The budget?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember that. Taking the
I
budget
know
on
we
the
did,
road.
because I was the chair, and we set up the meetings and probably 4 or 5 different neighborhoods, and there weren't very many people that came, unfortunately.
Okay. Ms. Williams?
If you do a budget with a tax increase, it'll turn
Ms. Williams?
But I was going to say, that's why it's important to do these types of deliberations as a council, because that's a very important idea. If we're already able to, I'm not in no position trying to have us recreate the wheel. I just want to see it happen. So if we can come together and develop a framework for how that town hall is going to happen and occur, and if we hold each other accountable to be present, because I think there is power in numbers, and as a council, we should be engaging the city. I'm not opposed to just having something that is already done in the past, and just making sure we pick the right topic to improve our exposure.
Nice. So what are you looking for at this point in time?
I would say if the consensus is shifting towards having a town hall, I can formulate some themes to have the conversation around. And if in the meantime, everyone can just come up with what their individual expectations for a town hall, it's how you envision that being structured. I think we just...
Okay. Do you want to bring this back up again in 2 weeks? So in 2 weeks, we just kind of come back to the table with what we'd like to see happen, maybe talk about some topics we'd like to see, and you'll we can talk about different locations. And of course, we're going to have to worry about, concern ourselves with making sure that we have the technology that we need, so. All right.
Just a clarification, so we're still going to be continuing discussion, having city council meeting and/or town hall meeting outside of city hall in the next 2 weeks.
Well,
Sure.
My understanding is we were just really talking about town halls. Are you still want to
Yeah, I think
continue
we
the
should-
discussion
yeah,
about
we still should have
the city council meeting outside the city hall?
well,
Patrick?
I wouldn't be in favor of that, so I don't know, I think you were looking for whether there was consensus among the board members, among the council members, about whether we would be interested in doing city council meetings. My statement was that I would rather hold our city council meetings and our city council committee meetings here. I would be open to having topical meetings in other neighborhoods and other settings. So that's just my vote.
So it's clear that, so let's just have a, just kind of like, just talk this through. So are you still interested in doing council meetings, not necessarily right now, not that one this year, but in the future? Is that something you're still interested in doing?
Yes, in the future, but if we're able to have one now, the town hall discussion to see how it's received and see how it's formulated, I think it'd be more or less like a test.
Mr. Rivera? I know you.
No, I'm open to that. I mean, you're gonna have it back in 2 weeks for further discussion. So we'll have both to the table back when we discuss things.
All right, we can discuss both again.
Yes.
And just see where we are with it.
I would prefer. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Toro?
Oh, are we going around the table?
We are.
Okay, so I like Carl's idea, town hall, see how that works out, and then in the future, if it works out well this time and we want to discuss it, again, I think our meetings belong here in our government building, and, but maybe we get some more folks to join us, but I think for now, if we have a town hall and all of a sudden it seems like there's 40 people who might want to have us do a special meeting, something we can bring back to the table and discuss.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Palomino, did you have more input?
I just think our meetings should be here. This is the center of our city government. It's important for people to know where this building is, what it represents. It represents everybody in this city. And it's important to try to get people here, whether it's kids, and maybe we can have one day a month where we do tours for kids or school groups. If the mayor's available, he could come and see them. That would be something worthwhile to get kids here and younger people. But I think it's vital for having government meetings in our cities where our city government is centered is important. And if we truly want to hear what people have to say, the town hall concept allows them to talk and for us to be quiet and listen. And I think that, to me, is the more appropriate way to go.
Well, I think both are acceptable, and we'll just continue to go down this road. I understand what you're saying about this being, being the center of government. However, the city is also part of the people that we serve, and so meeting them where they are, I think is of equal importance. So we'll put it on again for 2 weeks and just continue these discussions. So if you can bring back your...
If I may.
Yes, Mr.
In order for
Rivera.
us to do this, do we need a resolution? Or is this something that the council will decide?
So the language in the city code says that council meetings are to take place at City Hall unless otherwise posted with proper notice. I would say that it doesn't really set out whether or not you have to do something by resolution for that purpose. For the purposes of, providing notice to the public, my recommendation would be that the council pass a resolution for that purpose.
So if we're going to do a special meeting, because it does give how that's done. That special meeting, that's clearly covered in the code. So if we're not going to do a special meeting, however, or if we're going to call it a town hall, what would we need to do?
No, you wouldn't have to, no, because, there's nothing in the code that talks about town hall meetings, right? So anything that were to happen, obviously the council can obviously agree to do it. If somebody didn't make it, there's nothing, in the code that requires a council person to attend the town hall, to be frank. As opposed to, certain requirements related to attending regular meetings and, actual meetings of the council. The other thing is if you were to do a town hall, you couldn't take any formal action, obviously, as Mr. Palomino mentioned, is to, listen to what people have to say. It's one of those times where we would just have to, you as council people would have to sit there and just listen to what people say, because you can't take official action because it's not a regularly called council meeting.
Excuse me, one last, but they could ask us questions.
Yes.
at a time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not like,
You would create the format,
yeah,
Okay.
but you couldn't obviously pass a resolution.
right, no, I
You
just,
cannot take formal action.
yeah.
All right, well, let's bring this back in 2 weeks, and we'll see, definitely discussions, and it sounds like we're leaning more towards town hall, but I think at some point, special meeting outside should not be outside the realm of possibility. Any other questions or discussions on that?
No?
Okay, we'll be back in 2 weeks with that. Thank you, Mr. Williams. All right, the next item on the agenda is a ceremonial resolution for Dury Amy Zion Church. They're going to be 185 years old. They are the oldest black church in the city, and their event is on the 29th, so I'd like to be able to present them with a ceremonial resolution.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And the next item for public is a ceremonial resolution for Arbor Day, which is the 29th of April this year. We do a resolution for them every year. We would invite folks from Retree and whoever else is helping. I know Community Fathers is involved with doing some of the tree planting nowadays. So we just invite folks to City Hall to accept that resolution.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the final 4 items are for executive session to discuss property sales. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to go in executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're going to go in executive session.